Have you ever looked at your life and wondered if everything you believed was a lie? If the person sleeping next to you every night was just playing a role, waiting for a better offer? I never thought I'd be asking these questions, but here I am, trying to make sense of how 12 years of marriage became nothing but an elaborate con job. If this story resonates with you, share it to help us grow the Whispered Truths channel. Sometimes sharing our darkest moments helps others find their way through their own darkness. My name is Ethan Reynolds. 7 years ago, I started Blue Wave Cleaning with nothing but a mop, some industrial cleaner, and desperate determination. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., drag myself to office buildings before the first employees arrived, and clean until my hands were raw. I'd come home smelling of chemicals, my body aching, but with a sense of pride that grew with each new client. I was building something from nothing, creating my own destiny. Vanessa came into my life during those early hustle days. I met her at a coffee shop where I was desperately trying to stay awake between jobs. I spilled coffee on her designer blouse, a blouse I later learned cost more than my weekly earnings. Instead of getting angry, she laughed. That laugh. God, that laugh would become both my greatest joy and eventually my undoing. "It's just a shirt," she said, dabbing at the stain. "Things can be replaced. Time can't. Buy me another coffee and we'll call it even." I never stood a chance. Vanessa was everything. I wasn't polished, sophisticated, from a good family, as her mother Margaret never tired of reminding me. But somehow, impossibly, she chose me. On our third date, I confessed my dreams of building Blue Wave into something significant. Instead of laughing, she leaned forward, eyes bright with what I thought was admiration. "You know what I love about you, Ethan? You don't just dream. You do. Most men talk about what they'll accomplish someday. You're out there making it happen with your own 2 hands." We married 11 months later. I could barely afford the ring, but Vanessa insisted she didn't need anything extravagant. "It's not about the diamond," she whispered as I slid it onto her finger. "It's about us building a future together. I believe in you, Ethan. I believe in what we're creating." Those first 5 years were everything I'd ever wanted. While I spent long days growing the business from a one-man operation to a company with 15 employees, Vanessa renovated our modest home, turning it into a place I was proud to return to each night. She charmed my clients at company events, remembered the names of my employees' children, and never once complained about the long hours I put in. When we'd fall asleep at night, her head on my chest, her breathing synced with mine, I believed I'd found the one person who truly saw me. Not just the guy with calloused hands who smelled like industrial cleaner, but the man with dreams bigger than our mortgage. She was my cheerleader, my confidant, my safe harbor. Or so I thought. As Blue Wave grew steadily successful, I noticed subtle changes in Vanessa. It started innocuously enough. She joined several women's clubs in our neighborhood, began attending more social events. She became increasingly obsessed with Instagram influencers, spending hours perfecting posts about our curated life together. I was proud to see her building her own interests, even if I didn't fully understand this new social media world she was embracing. But then our nights together began to dwindle. She was always at networking events for her budding influencer career. When she was home, she started making strange comments about my work clothes, suggesting I change before accompanying her anywhere public. "Couldn't you at least wear something that doesn't scream, 'I clean toilets for a living'?" she asked once, her nose wrinkling as I walked in, wearing my Blue Wave polo. I laughed it off initially. "This polo pays for those shoes you're wearing," I joked. She didn't laugh back. That should have been my first warning. I first noticed something was truly wrong when Vanessa started showering the moment I got home, as if my mere presence contaminated her. She'd immediately change out of whatever clothes I'd touched. Phone calls would end abruptly when I entered rooms. She started locking her phone. When I asked about these changes, she dismissed them as being more professional, now that she was building her personal brand as an influencer. "You don't understand how these things work, Ethan," she'd say, her voice taking on that condescending tone that had become increasingly familiar. "Image is everything in my world. I can't be associated with certain things. Certain things, meaning your husband's work? I finally asked one night. Don't be so sensitive, she snapped. I'm just trying to elevate us both. Someone has to think about our future in this marriage. Have you ever had that gut feeling something isn't right in your relationship, but you pushed it down because the truth was too scary to face? That's where I found myself, sensing something was deeply wrong, but terrified to discover what it might be. If you've been there, leave a comment below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward facing them. The more successful Blue Wave became, the more Vanessa seemed to resent it, or rather, resent what it represented. She began comparing our lifestyle to her new wealthy friends constantly. Why couldn't we vacation in the Maldives like her friend Chelsea's family? Why didn't I drive a vehicle befitting a successful business owner instead of my reliable but ordinary pickup truck? Blake and Sophia Harrington just bought a summer house in the Hamptons, she mentioned casually one evening. Blake knows how to leverage his success. Maybe you should talk to him about investment strategies. Blake Harrington. That name would eventually become a knife twist in my gut, but at the time, he was just another wealthy businessman in Vanessa's ever-expanding social circle, people I was rarely invited to meet. One night, I found receipts for an expensive restaurant downtown from an evening Vanessa claimed she'd been with the girls. The charge was for 2 people, and the wine alone cost more than I'd spend on a week of groceries. When I casually mentioned finding the receipt, Vanessa's explanation came too quickly, too rehearsed. Oh, Chelsea was going to pay me back for her half. I must have forgotten to ask her. That night I did something I'd never imagined doing. I scrolled through Vanessa's Instagram while she slept. There were dozens of photos from exclusive parties I'd never been invited to, tagged with names of people I'd never met. In many of them, a tall, distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair appeared in the background. Blake Harrington. Always nearby, always watching my wife with an expression I recognized all too well. I became a detective in my own marriage. Each night after Vanessa fell asleep, I'd catalog the lies, designer clothes appearing in her closet we couldn't afford, mysterious weekend work retreats with no company name, credit card charges at hotels across town. I started following her Instagram activity like it was evidence in a crime, and in many ways, it was. The breaking point came when I decided to surprise Vanessa for lunch downtown, near where she claimed to be having a, quote, content creation meeting. Stopping for a quick drink to calm my nerves, I showed the bartender Vanessa's picture, asking if he'd seen her. His face changed immediately. Sure, she comes in all the time with her husband, he said casually, wiping down the bar. I'm her husband, I replied, my stomach dropping. The bartender froze, then looked genuinely apologetic. Shit, man. I mean, the guy she's always with. I just assumed. Tall guy? Salt and pepper hair? Expensive watch? He nodded slowly. They were here last night. Regular table in the back. Always pays cash, big tipper. I felt physically ill. For the next week, I followed Vanessa's movements, documenting times, places, inconsistencies in her stories. Then, one Tuesday night, when she claimed to be at a women's entrepreneurship dinner, I tracked her to La Maison, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. I didn't need a reservation. I just needed to look through the window from the right angle. There they were, Vanessa and Blake Harrington, her hand in his, their foreheads nearly touching across the table. I watched, frozen, as he brushed her hair back, as she leaned into his touch like a cat being stroked. I should have left then, preserved what little dignity I had left. Instead, I moved closer, finding a spot near their table where I could hear their conversation through the partial opening of a nearby window. What I heard destroyed me more completely than any physical intimacy I might have witnessed. When are you finally going to leave him? Blake asked, his fingers tracing circles on Vanessa's wrist. She sighed dramatically. You know it's complicated. I need to make sure I get what I deserve from this divorce. Ethan's business is finally worth something. My lawyer says timing is everything. I'm getting tired of sharing you, Blake said, his voice lowering. Especially with someone who's just the help. And then Vanessa laughed. That same laugh that had once enchanted me in a coffee shop, now aimed at me like a weapon. Ethan thinks we're saving for our dream house, she said, twirling Blake's Rolex around her finger. He has no idea I've been moving money to our escape fund for months. He still believes I love him. Do you think he suspects anything? Ethan? Another laugh. He's exactly what I needed. Just a stepping stone until something better came along. He's too busy cleaning office buildings to notice what's happening right under his nose. I stood frozen behind a decorative column, my heart collapsing while expensive wine flowed at their table. 12 years of marriage reduced to a con job. I watched them for another 20 minutes, mechanical in my surveillance, detached as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life falling apart. They kissed deeply before leaving separately. Blake slipped the maitre d' what looked like several $100 bills. My wife, the woman who had promised to grow old with me, walked out into the night to her lover's waiting car. What I didn't know then was that the woman I'd devoted my life to had already mapped out exactly how much of my business she could legally take, and the plan had been in motion for longer than I could have imagined. I confronted Vanessa the next morning. I laid out everything, the receipts, the hotel charges, the observations from the bartender, what I'd overheard at La Maison. I expected denials, gaslighting, more lies. Instead, she broke down crying, collapsing to her knees in our kitchen. I made a terrible mistake, she sobbed, grabbing my hands. Blake means nothing. It was just a stupid fling during a rough patch. I was feeling neglected. You're always working. You called me a stepping stone, I said quietly. You've been stealing our money. No, you misunderstood, she looked up, eyes swimming with tears. I was just saying things I thought he wanted to hear. I love you, Ethan. Only you. I'll break it off with him today. We can go to counseling, work on us. Please, don't throw away 12 years over one mistake. I'd like to say I was strong enough to walk away then, but the truth is I wanted to believe her. Some desperate part of me wanted to think she'd temporarily lost her mind, that she could still be the Vanessa I'd fallen in love with. Against every instinct, I agreed to try. For 6 weeks, Vanessa was the perfect wife again, loving, attentive, even visiting my office, and showing interest in Blue Wave. She suggested date nights, initiated intimacy, left loving notes in my lunch. I began to believe, against all evidence, that perhaps we could rebuild. That's the power of hope. It can make you blind to obvious truth. I came home early one day to surprise her with flowers. Instead, I surprised her on a phone call with her lawyer. 2 more months should be enough time to document everything, she was saying. I want to make sure I get at least half of the business assets. Later that night, while she was showering, I found her diary hidden in her desk drawer. I'm not proud of violating her privacy, but what was left to violate between us? Inside were detailed notes about her affair with Blake, strategies for maximizing her divorce settlement, and a particularly devastating entry. 2 more months of pretending should be enough to secure the business assets. Every day with Ethan feels like prison, but the payoff will be worth it. Those 6 weeks of reconciliation were the cruelest part of her performance. Every "I love you" was a calculated investment. Every intimate moment was just buying time. The woman sleeping beside me was just negotiating the price of my broken heart. This double betrayal broke something fundamental inside me. I spiraled into a depression unlike anything I'd experienced before. I neglected Blue Wave, turning work over to my managers while I stayed in bed for days. I started drinking too much, isolated myself from friends, stopped answering calls. The business I'd built with my blood and sweat began to suffer as I suffered. I later discovered Vanessa had told our social circle I was emotionally abusive to justify her affair. Some friends I'd had for years stopped speaking to me, convinced I was the monster in this story. The isolation became nearly unbearable. One night, drunk and desperate, I overheard Vanessa on the phone with her mother. "I know, Mom," she was saying, her voice exasperated, "but I need to stick it out a little longer. The lawyers say if I leave now, I might not get as much. Yes, I know you warned me about marrying a janitor. You were right. A janitor. After all these years building something from nothing, that's all I was to her family. Maybe they had been right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe this was all I deserved." There's a specific kind of emptiness that comes from realizing your entire marriage was a calculation. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., staring at ceiling cracks, wondering if I'd imagined every loving moment between us. Had her eyes ever genuinely lit up when I entered a room? Was there ever a moment she was truly proud of me? I began to disappear even from myself. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved completely, you understand this emptiness. Drop a heart in the comments. Every heart represents someone who's felt this pain but refused to let their story end at the betrayal. After months of silent suffering, surviving on autopilot, something inside me finally snapped back to life. Not love or hope, but dignity, self-preservation. I confronted Vanessa with everything. The overheard legal call, her diary, what I knew about their continued relationship. She initially denied it all, her face a mask of indignation. When I quoted her diary back to her word for word, the mask fell. Her eyes went cold in a way I'd never seen before. "What did you expect, Ethan?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you know how humiliating it is to tell people my husband cleans toilets for a living? When I met you, I thought you had ambition. I thought Blue Wave would become something important. I didn't sign up to be married to the help." Something in me finally broke free. "No," I replied quietly. "You signed up to use the help while looking for a better offer." "Blake understands the world I want to live in," she continued, pacing our living room. "He can give me the life I deserve." "You deserve each other," I said, finding a strange calm settling over me. "You're both users. The difference is, he'll eventually use you too." She slapped me hard across the face. "You're pathetic. You think I ever loved you? You were convenient, that's all." I filed for divorce the next day, with the evidence I'd gathered, financial records, her diary, recordings of conversations. I had a solid case. Still, I wasn't prepared for how vicious Vanessa would become. She contested everything, claiming she'd been instrumental in building Blue Wave, that she deserved half of everything I'd built. During a particularly tense deposition, my lawyer presented financial records showing Vanessa had secretly drained our joint savings account, nearly $109,000, and had taken out loans against my business without my knowledge. The judge examined the financial records with increasing disbelief. "Mrs. Reynolds, you transferred $47,000 from your joint retirement account to a private account in the Caymans?" Vanessa didn't even look ashamed. "I earned that money," she replied. The judge removed his glasses slowly. "According to these business records, you've never been employed by Blue Wave Cleaning." That moment, watching her carefully constructed facade crumble under the weight of documented truth, was the first time I'd breathed fully in months. Vanessa moved in with Blake while the divorce proceeded. I was left financially devastated, fighting to save my company from the debt she'd leveraged against it. I was working 18-hour days again, just like when I started, trying to keep Blue Wave afloat while paying legal fees I couldn't afford. As I sat alone in our emptied house, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "I know what Vanessa and Blake are planning next. Meet me tomorrow if you want to save what's left of your company." The sender? The last person on earth I expected to become my greatest ally. Sophia Harrington, Blake's wife, contacted me 6 months into the divorce proceedings. We met at a quiet coffee shop across town. She was elegant, poised, and surprisingly warm. Nothing like the cold socialite Vanessa had described. She pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "Blake collects women like trophies," Sophia explained, her voice steady. "He'll convince them to burn down their lives for him, then discard them once he's bored." She opened the folder, revealing photos, bank statements, and text messages. "He's done this 5 times in our marriage. Your wife isn't special to him." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why not divorce him?" Sophia smiled sadly. Our prenuptial agreement is ironclad. If I leave, I get nothing. If he leaves me for another woman, I get everything. I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right case. Your wife and my husband have been particularly sloppy this time. So this is about money for you, I said, disappointed but understanding. Partially, she admitted. But it's also about justice. He destroys people, Ethan. He and Vanessa deserve each other, but you didn't deserve what they did to you. I should have felt vindicated by Sophia's revelations, but instead, an unexpected wave of pity for Vanessa washed over me. She destroyed everything real for a mirage. Sophia and I began sharing information that helped both our cases. With her evidence added to mine, the divorce proceedings shifted dramatically in my favor. The court ruled that Vanessa had no claim to Blue Wave Cleaning, and she was ordered to repay the money she had taken. The most satisfying moment came when Vanessa discovered that Blake had no intention of leaving Sophia. He had merely been using Vanessa as his latest conquest. When she confronted him, he dropped her completely, refusing her calls and having her removed from events when she tried to approach him. The social circle she'd cultivated quickly froze her out. Her Instagram influencer dreams collapsed as quickly as her affair. 2 years have passed since the divorce was finalized. Blue Wave not only survived but thrived. I expanded into commercial property maintenance, doubling our revenue. The experience taught me about resilience, not just in business, but in life. I established a foundation providing entrepreneurship training to disadvantaged youth, teaching them that honest work, no matter how humble, contains dignity. Yesterday, I saw Vanessa for the first time in a year. She was working at a mall boutique, her social media empire dreams having evaporated, along with Blake's interest in her. Our eyes met briefly as I walked past with Sophia, who has become an unlikely friend and business partner in our new commercial property venture. Vanessa looked away first. I felt nothing but a quiet gratitude for the painful education she'd given me. Some lessons cost everything, but teach you what truly matters. The woman I married never existed. She was a role Vanessa played until a better opportunity came along. The pain of that knowledge almost destroyed me, but in rebuilding my life I found something I'd never fully had before: authentic peace. Ironically, Sophia and I found healing through our shared betrayal. Our friendship grew from mutual respect rather than attraction or calculation. We recently launched a support group for people rebuilding after betrayal, creating meaning from our pain. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that sometimes the people who harm us most deeply become the unwitting architects of our strongest selves. Vanessa intended to use me as a stepping stone. Instead, she became the fire that forged something unbreakable within me. For those of you listening who might be in the depths of betrayal right now, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, you will. The path forward isn't about forgetting what happened, but about refusing to let it define you. Your story doesn't end at the betrayal. It simply takes an unexpected turn toward something stronger, wiser, and ultimately more authentic than before. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might be struggling with betrayal. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our darkest moments is the first light that guides us back to ourselves. This is Ethan Reynolds, and you've been listening to Whispered Truths.